Hello, this is Jeremy, and today I'm doing a video about voter fraud in the 2020 elections, or lack thereof. The reason I'm doing this is because many friends and families have asked about voter fraud, and they believe there's large-scale voter fraud. Well, this presentation will cover 3 parts. 1, was there voter fraud? 2, why is Trump suing about it? And 3, why are we discussing it? So let's get on to the first section.
They stole a few elections, still we the people won. We voted out corruption, babe. Now there's folks in Washington that care what's on our mind. Come on, voters, let's all vote next time. Show which side are you on now? Which side are you on? Which side are you on now? Which side are you on?
First section, did large-scale voter fraud take place in the 2020 election? The short answer, no. The long answer, we can take a look at the White House's page on voter fraud. And what they say on that page is that of the last 20 years, out of 1 billion votes cast, 1,071 were fraudulent. The White House gets their data from the Heritage Foundation, a very conservative think tank. More neutral groups like NPR that looked at the same data for the same time period found 44 cases of voter fraud. Whether we're talking about 44 cases or 1,071 cases, out of 1 billion votes cast, there's no significance. On an average year, we have 53 cases of voter fraud. Now, the 2020 election, there's been no evidence presented that there's any wide-scale voter fraud. While the White House has made the claims, it has made these claims without evidence and without merit. And we'll get a little more on that in the next section. But just the basic concept that we go from 53 cases of fraud per year to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, that are being claimed by the White House is simply ridiculous. And then if you follow the claims of the White House, it's only the states that went Democrat that had voter fraud. None of the Republican states did. And it gets worse when Trump wanted the count to stop. He only wanted the count to stop in states he was ahead, or states he was behind, he wanted to continue the count. So when you look at that background, the concept that we had mass voter fraud versus Trump just lying is absolutely ridiculous. It's nutty. There was no mass voter fraud. Now let's go on to the next section. Why is Trump suing? Section 2. Why is Trump suing? Well, let's go over some of the cases real quick. One of the Trump claims was that 25,000 dead people voted. Not true. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania, which is the state with the claims against, he stated that what Trump campaigns calling dead people voting is actually father and sons with the same name, where the son lives at the father's former address. The father died. The son voted. The son got his vote counted. The dead person, of course, did not vote. Another instance was where the Trump campaign claimed, and this actually went to court, claimed that the observers from the parties weren't allowed to observe the vote counting. Well, the judge asked the Democrats, were your observers in the room while the vote was being counted? They said yes. He asked the Republicans, were your observers in the room where the vote was being counted? They said yes. The judge said, case dismissed. It was simply a fraudulent case. Now, the law firms representing Trump had a meeting on Monday, according to the New York Times, where they discussed the fact that they were putting all these fraudulent lawsuits forward with no evidence of voter fraud. Apparently, the board was worried that they were advanced arguments with the lack of evidence that may help Trump and his allies undermine the integrity of the U.S. elections. The law firm decided to continue to represent. At least one board member resigned in protest. Now, Trump's campaign, if we go back to them for a second, they're in debt. They owe money. Ultimately, the president owes that money. The fundraisers going out to raise money for these legal battles over voter fraud. If you read the fine print, many of them state that up to half the money collected could be used to pay down campaign debt. That is the real purpose of these lawsuits and the fundraiser to pay down campaign debt. Not because anything's real. None of the claims that were made had evidence. And even the lawyers representing the president admit there's a lack of evidence. Let's go on to the third section. So the last section, why are we even talking about voter fraud? Because if there's only 1,071 cases, over 1 billion votes cast over 20 years, why are we even here talking about it? Well, about 10 years ago, the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision gutted the Voting Rights Act, eliminating many protections we had for voting. Most people don't realize, but in the United States, we actually do not have a constitutional right to vote. Indeed, when the Constitution was first passed, only about 6% of the total population actually had the right to vote. Once this act was gutted, Republicans saw an opportunity to eliminate voters who didn't agree with them. However, that is extremely hard sell for politicians to say, hey, vote for me, because I'm going to eliminate that guy's vote. So what did they do? Republicans trumped up voter fraud. And then voter fraud, they say, hey, we need voter ID laws to protect us from voter fraud. The voter ID laws themselves are designed to eliminate votes that disagree with the Republican Party. And I'll read some things here. This is years ago. A senior vice president of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Chamber of Commerce, Steve Bass, stated in an email to drum up support for the voter ID law, do we need messaging? Widespread reports of election fraud. So we are positively set up to recount regardless of the final number. And then Scott Jensen, a Republican politician and tactician of that area, said, obviously, I think we should. And this whole email chain went on to eventually say, anything fishy should be highlighted. Stories should be solicited by talk radio shows. Alex Jones, Rush Limbaugh, the whole conservative media, even Fox News. And while these stories are solicited, there's no evidence anything actually took place. They're just fake stories. And in New Hampshire, we even had the same thing, the state I live, where they showed, this is Hillary Clinton's election back in 2016, they showed buses from Massachusetts near voting locations. Okay, that's not evidence any mass voters from Massachusetts actually voted in New Hampshire. That's just a bus, right? Now we get on, and it actually gets worse. Because the real intent of these voter laws were to suppress Democratic votes. Indeed, numerous Republican lawmakers have stated that directly. Pennsylvania Republican House leader Mike Therese, during the presidential election of Mitt Romney, stated, the voter ID laws is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done. End quote. And in Wisconsin, the staff aide to the legislator, our Republican staff aide to the legislator, attributed his decision to leave the Republican Party and quit his job to this, what he wrote on Facebook. I was in a closed Republican caucus when the final round of multiple voter ID bills were being discussed. A handful of the GOP senators were giddy about the ramifications of literally signaling out the prospects of suppressing minority and college votes, who mostly vote Democrat. Think about that for a minute. Elected officials planning and happy to help deny a fellow American the constitutional right to vote in order to increase their own chances of hanging on to power. Please note, there's actually no constitutional right to vote. And these voter ID laws, with the clear intent to suppress voters, have swept the nation. And the reason legislators have passed this, or the reason Republicans are selling this to the public, is because they're trumping up these fake stories of fraud. That's why we hear about it. In conclusion, did mass voter fraud happen? Looking at the historical precedents, it's absolutely ludicrous, if not outright ridiculous, to believe that we went from 50 or so votes of voter fraud per year to hundreds of thousands. It's just not something that's going to happen. Did President Trump claim voter fraud happened? Yeah, He didn't show any evidence, and he's a serial liar that is easy to find. I mean, while in office, he's told over 23,000 lies. So we added a couple more to that count. And only reason we're hearing about voter fraud right now is because Republicans want to pass voter ID laws that suppress voters that don't agree with them. That's it. There was no mass voter fraud that took place.